All right, everyone, welcome to the show. Our very special guest today is Barbara Cave Henricks. She is the author of Mastering the New Media Landscape, Embrace the Micromedia Mindset. She has worked as a publicist in the publishing industry for more than 2 decades and now runs her own publicity firm that's been very successful called Cave Henricks Communications. Barbara, it's great to have you.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in the publishing industry.
Sure. I actually started my career in journalism. So I was a radio journalist and I worked as a journalist for 10 years. I started out in my hometown back in Indiana, moved around the country as people in those jobs tend to be. Are you from Indiana?
Yeah, South Bend is where I grew up.
I grew up in Hammond.
Yeah.
Hoosier pride. Guys, get ready. The talk may turn to basketball then. So I started out in my hometown. I moved around the country. I was a reporter in South Carolina, and I landed there just when a whole bunch of national news hit. We had the last primary before Super Tuesday, which might resonate with people right now since that's what we're seeing all the time. We had a tornado, we had a hurricane, we had all kinds of things happen. And NBC came looking for a stringer, and they wanted someone without an accent. So that Hoosier Pride showed up, and I did a lot of stringer work for them for about 6 months, and then I moved to Washington. When I was in Washington, part of my job as an editor and producer was to produce, of course, the news for NBC and Mutual Radio, because they were co-owned at the time. And once a week, I went down the hall to the Larry King Show to produce his radio show long before TV. And every day they would come down the hall with a trolley full of books, usually more than 100 every day. And part of the job was to dig through the books and figure out who was a good guest. And I was kind of appalled because we got all kinds of things that Larry King would have never done. You know, we got children's books, we got cookbooks, we got, YA, we got everything. And I felt like it was making a lot of noise for the other publicists who actually had books that were pertinent to someone like Larry King. So I started pitching myself. I decided I wanted to switch chairs. I'd always been a book lover, so I started looking for jobs in New York. I got hired by Workman Publishing. You guys probably know those from the What to Expect When You're Expecting series, the Preppy Handbook, the New Basics Cookbook. And I worked on all of those for a couple of years. Then I moved to Houghton Mifflin. Then I spent a decade working for a PR firm that specialized in books. And when I was there, I started the business book division, which I ran for 10 years. And then in 2006, I decided it was time to go out on my own. So that was my path, sort of the journalism path into the book path.
That's awesome. Well, I know in your new book, you talked about, kind of micromedia and how the media landscape has totally changed. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it used to be that a book campaign was done one way. There was like a super highway down the middle of the road, and the only way to get your message out about that book was traditional or earned media. The book came to us in the publicity department or at an outside firm. We looked at the book, we came up with messages, we pitched it to the producers or the gatekeepers of media. So it was a one shot. If you didn't get the attention of the gatekeeper, you were kind of in a void. What, of course, now has changed is that there's basically a road right down the middle where everybody can go directly to their audience. That's social media, that's websites, that's all kinds of new content. So what we're looking at now isn't a landscape with one route, nor is it really a landscape where there's traditional media and social media. Instead, I like to think of it in 3 buckets. So there's traditional or earned media, and that's any place that you have to get past a gatekeeper, whether it's NBC television or this show right here, where our people had to pitch and ask you, Tom, whether I could be a guest. All of that is earned. Rented media is largely social media. That's where you're producing content and you're putting it out, but you're sitting it on a channel that somebody else owns. So your Facebook account, your Twitter account, your LinkedIn profile, all of that is yours, but it sits on rented space. And if those companies go out of business, poof, so does your following. The third space is what I would call owned media. And this is any real estate that you own and control. And that's everything from your own website to an email newsletter list, to any other way that you have direct access to an audience where you control the content. So what's changed is that instead of just going to the earned space, instead what we're doing is sort of training up authors to participate in that other arena, in the rented space on social media and on their own space on their websites.
Gotcha. And so Are all three of those buckets kind of equally important nowadays for most authors, or what would you say about that?
I would say they are. So the way they work is if you think of them as in a circle. So each one really feeds the other. So if you get something in traditional media and then you go on and you tweet about it, you post it on your Facebook page and you share it on LinkedIn and you do it out, you're going to rent it. And then the rented space can also then interest people in you, and they may come around and go back to your own space. So in other words, they may see me here and then they may follow me over on LinkedIn in a rented space, or they might join my email list on my own website. So they all three are important and they all feed each other. I think the trick is figuring out the best places to participate for your specific message. So everybody's composite of those three buckets will look a little differently. You kind of have to custom make them.
Gotcha. And so, when most people think about, hiring a publicist, they're usually thinking about like earned media, right? I mean, I doubt many people would think I need a publicist because I need my own website, right?
Yeah.
But has that shifted now? I mean, are publishing company or publicity companies like yours doing things completely differently nowadays, or is it still very much just pitching earned media?
No, we're doing things a lot differently. So yes, we are still one of probably our core skill or our skill set definitely is in securing that earned media. And the reason that stays important is because as there's less and less earned media around, it becomes more valuable. General economic principle. In fact, I've yet to have an author come through the door who didn't want that earned channel. But what we're also doing now is we're helping people, since we create so much content and messaging when we promote a book, is a lot of times now we're serving as the content provider for somebody's website. So, or we'll project manage the website so that all of this content that's created can basically, be reused. So a lot of what we do is that. And then the next hat we wear is becoming a bigger and bigger portion of our job, which is teaching everybody to participate. Well, we have just a really interesting situation. We have what I would call the largest, population of layman journalists. We're all journalists now. We're blogging, we're tweeting, we're posting on LinkedIn, we're creating a profile, but most of us aren't professional communicators. So a lot of what we do is sort of teach people the ways that they contribute where they will get the more traction from their efforts. So yeah, our job has changed a lot. In addition to that, as I said, they feed each other. So if we get a hit over here in traditional media, we're not only going to be pushing it out on our social media channels, we're going to be asking the author to do that, and also then asking them who else in their network can serve as amplifiers. Who else should we be talking to? Who else has a mail, a large following or an email list that might be willing to share that content out? So the job has shifted an awful lot, and most rapidly, I would say, in the last 5 years.
Gotcha. So what does kind of the standard, publicity package look like for a book nowadays in terms of, how would you approach, bringing on a new client? How would you approach that process?
So I think this is another thing that's really rapidly changed. When I started in this business at an agency 20 years ago, everybody came in and bought the same package, a book launch that typically lasted 4 to 6 months. We started at the galley phase of books. We went out to long lead media, and we pulled back after a little bit of outreach on that for a month or two. We prepared a press kit. We got ready to repeat that project with a finished book. And at that second stage, we expanded from long lead publications to everyone. Short leads, daily newspaper, broadcast, online, everything. So typically about, triple the audience. Now we really custom make campaigns. So just like you go to Starbucks and you order your coffee and it's very, very specific, a campaign for an author can be very specific. So right now we have clients on board who came to us for traditional launch, and we are playing the role I just described. But typically along with that, part of our component is training people up on social media, giving them tips, doing a brand audit, taking a really close look at what pops up about them online and how they can improve that so that it will help their book when that time comes. To clients that we have who came on board for a book launch and decided to stay on board with us, and where we serve as a retainer. And so they say, this was great, and during the course of my campaign, you were able to field, you were able to react to whatever was going on in the news and put my name out there again, even though the book isn't brand new. You helped me edit and write that column that you got for me on Forbes, so I want to keep you on board for that. So we have clients who fit into kind of the retainer. We also have clients who come to us for something that is, a component of a campaign. So right now we're working on a book with Grand Central Publishing, which is part of Hachette, where they had a good campaign in place for, the general media, but they wanted somebody to pull out and do just the education media. So there's a big portion of this book that would be appealing to teachers, to parents, to professional education magazines. So we joined the Grand Central team, essentially working right alongside them, and worked that education piece. When Grand Central was done working on that book, which is usually about 6 weeks after it publishes, we were able to keep that project going for the client. So we join in whatever capacity someone needs. I would say the only thing we don't do is we don't take on a project and shoot just for one specific kind of media. So if someone comes and says, I just want to buy your service to pitch me to national television, we don't do that. And the reason we don't is because getting on national television is often very dependent on what happens elsewhere. So if I can get a great piece in the New York Times, I'm going to have a better chance of getting that author on national television or on NPR or elsewhere. So we do work in sort of a holistic way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've kind of noticed a very similar thing, among authors. Like if they're not, taking advantage of all the opportunities in front of them, like they just want to do just Twitter, then it can be difficult to really get the broad following and the exposure that you could have gotten if you had really focused on doing, taking advantage of all the opportunities that are sitting in front of you.
Yeah, I think, and people get very overwhelmed. I mean, we all face that. And we certainly see the author who comes and says, I didn't know what to do about my PR. So last weekend I went and I opened up a Twitter account and a Facebook page and I started a new LinkedIn group and they sign up for 6 or 8 or 10 places. This is often not a great idea. The reason is it's just too much, too fast. So what we try to do is go in and analyze, where is this author's audience? Are they people that are going to be collected on Twitter? Are they people that LinkedIn is important? We want to pick a couple of channels and teach people how to get really fluent and comfortable in those, and then set up a schedule where they can consistently contribute. I think consistency in all of those channels is really important. So in my mind, it's better not to have a Twitter account if the last thing you posted was in 2010. Because what happens is I get on the phone with the media or I send the media email and I say, hey, I'm pitching Tom today. And while I'm speaking or while they're reading that email, they're typing your name into a search engine. And they're going to see probably, maybe you have your own website. Maybe they're going to see your bio on LinkedIn. Oh, here's your Twitter account. And if they see that you're not active, or if that account doesn't really reflect what you're talking about today, often the conversation's over. So what we try to do is say to people, let's pick the channels that are good for you. And let's make sure that the way that you're speaking and contributing and representing yourself and even creating your bio there is really ties into the book. So if I call and say, hey, I'm promoting Professor X and he has a book out on terrorism, it better be that when they go on and search this person's name and they find all those accounts, that it mentions he's an expert on terrorism. That seems so easy, but people change, what's top priority list, what the new book is about. That all needs to be integrated and embedded.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. What about for authors? I know I've worked with a lot of clients and coaching clients, and they don't really want to do social media. I mean, they just want someone to manage the marketing for them. Is that going to really hurt the publicity campaign, or is it, how does that work?
Well, I would say it's missing, like you feel, it's missing an opportunity, managing a campaign. So, we often jump on board and we will provide social media content for people for a couple of weeks around their launch. We will teach them how to communicate about a great review of their book or a terrific interview that they did. Help them understand that you can't create a Twitter channel or really any social media account that's 100% me first, just promoting me, promoting me, promoting me. What we don't do is just come on and assume the voice of someone else. We want them to really be communicating in their own voice. So what I would say, if they don't want to do it at all, my job is then convincing them maybe there's 1 or 2 activities in that space that would be worth doing, that they might be able to see results from, that they could get comfortable with. I think a lot of people just don't realize that these channels aren't just simply to broadcast out. I mean, Twitter so frequently is compared to a cocktail party. I think that's a good description. People are on there to chat. The first thing we do with a client is find the names of anywhere from 20 to 100 reporters who cover whatever their topic is about and have them follow them on Twitter. Then what we say is, start listening into the conversation. And when it feels natural to contribute, start contributing. So, yes, I think if you ignore social media altogether in this day and age, you do definitely miss a chance because, as I said at the beginning, that's the one way you can get past the gatekeeper. The other way, you're just waiting until the gatekeeper decides you're important enough. You want that, of course, but sometimes to get there, it's nice to have this other place where you can be in control of the message. You don't have to wait for permission. And sometimes that's the compelling argument that people begin to see. Sometimes also what happens in social media, as you know, with videos that go viral and the blue and black dress that shut down, the nation, where Congress was tweeting about the dress, I think what you see is if something gets a lot of attention in social media space, that can become a convincing argument to the traditional media that often wants to cover things that are becoming a trend or becoming important, or gee, that HBR article was shared, 1,000 times. That must be something really interesting. So it really is sort of societal proof, that a movement is catching on. That's why I really think that authors can get more excited about it when they realize that. It gives them back some power.
Definitely. I totally agree with that. Well, and you talked about the 3 buckets, and one of them we haven't talked much about so far is owned media. So what are some of the key things that authors need to do and that you help your clients do in the owned media pile? Yeah,
so when they're setting up a channel for owned media, and typically that it can be a blog. If somebody isn't ready to go to a full-scale website or that's not practical, a blog can serve that purpose. What we're really trying to teach them is, growing an audience in owned is really, really valuable, because if Facebook shuts down and LinkedIn shuts down and closes down my 15,000 contacts on LinkedIn, hopefully some of those people have come over and joined me in my own space. So when you create it, you really need to think more like a journalist or a media executive than like a marketer. So your page should be full of things that make people want to come back. I always ask people, what news sources or what information sources do you check pretty routinely every day? Usually they're pretty good candidates, 3 or 4. And I say, why do you go back? Because it's valuable. It always has something that interests me. There's typically always an update or something new. Those guidelines can really help people in the own space. And then one step further is really to take that own space and perk something on it that requires people to give you an email address or a way to communicate with them. That's part of that amassing of audience. So by the time your next book comes out, you might have, a list of 10,000 subscribers who joined you because of the first book and are probably your natural first audience for your next one. So it's really just kind of shifting the mindset. Don't sell, sell, sell. Instead, offer, offer, offer really valuable content.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That just makes a lot of sense. And, it's one thing so many guests on the show have talked about is like building your email list and how important that is. And especially like you said, for your next book launch, like it's for some people it's hard to think about the next book launch away, but if you can do that, then you'll be amazed at the results that you can achieve over time by really sticking with it. And like you said, kind of like earning the trust of your audience and like constantly putting out great information and joining the conversation on social media and being like that expert in your field. Like that's how you do it is by, like you said, communicating professionally with people and really sharing your message consistently. And it's a consistency that's key. And if you're consistent over, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you'll be amazed how far you can go. So I'm wondering, do a lot of authors just fail at publicity because they just don't give it enough time and consistency? Or are there just some authors who are just doomed to never be, to never get publicity because of, maybe who they are or what they're writing about or something like that?
I don't think anyone is doomed. I think some are more challenging than others. I think when you think about this, I do think people think about too short a window for publicity. So a lot of times one of the questions that used to come up a little less frequently now because of the current environment is, why do I want to hire a publicist if my publisher has one? Why do I need to duplicate that service? I don't understand why that's useful. The problem is that most publicity efforts are far too short to create results. If you have a huge name and a public profile, you come out with a book and you're going to get an enormous amount of coverage just based on your name. Almost no one fits into that category. I mean, everybody in my shoes has worked with, you know, authors who just have the name recognition, and basically your job kind of boils down to just filling in their schedule. You know, you don't have to do much pitching when you've got a known commodity. It takes much longer when you don't have a known commodity. So what I always say to people is, how long did it take you to write the book? Because you might want to allot that long to promoting the book. I think people come in, they don't see results in the first 4 to 6 weeks. They get discouraged. They say, oh, nobody cared. It just didn't matter. The truth is that very few books take off that quickly. So, you know, I worked on a book called StrengthsFinder 2.0. The precursor to that book, Now Discover Your Strengths, which came out in the late 1990s, ended up being a huge deal. It was a New York Times bestseller, a Wall Street Journal bestseller. We amassed 400,000 people who took the assessment on it. We didn't get our first media hit until 12 weeks into that campaign. 12 weeks. And that media hit happened to be NPR, which was a huge ignition switch for the entire campaign. But the fact was, for 12 weeks, we were pushing against the gatekeepers. Back in '99, there weren't all these opportunities. And, you know, these were authors who hung in. So, yeah, I think people just get discouraged. I always tell people, you don't want my job if you don't like hearing no, because we get lots and lots of no's. But sometimes a no can be instructive. It can be, hey, we just covered that, or, hey, I liked that, but, you know, I don't think it's particularly new, or, you know what, that doesn't interest me. Does he say anything else in the book that I might care about? So sometimes we can ascertain, like, oh, they turned it down because they already did 3 interviews, or, hey, chapter 6 of that book seems way more interesting to the media than chapter 2, so we need to go out and pitch chapter 6. And that takes time. So people do get very discouraged, and I understand it. Publishing a book is extremely public and very vulnerable. I've always said that. Now I really get it, having a book of my own.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It definitely is, you know, putting yourself out there. And like you said, getting all those no's, and, you know, when it goes for 12 weeks, that's like 3 months of not getting a response. That's got to be really disappointing. But it's amazing to see the results you can get if you stick with it.
Yeah, I think like everything, consistency. And email lists, as you know, they don't grow overnight. Everybody always wants the silver bullet. They want the silver bullet media hit, the one hit that's going to take them from obscurity to superstardom. And the truth is that is almost never one hit alone. It is usually a collective. And the other thing they want is the one, you know, the one carrot on their website that will do the same. You know, StrengthsFinder, the carrot is the assessment. You know, there's millions and millions of people now who have taken that, and that works very well. But there are other carrots that work too. Also, people can change them up. You know, you can offer an assessment or a workbook or a way to plot your own career course on some kind of a free downloadable thing in order to get an email. And if it doesn't work, you know what? Consider it feedback and try something else. But don't fold the tent and say nobody cared. You know, and it's a noisy environment. There's so much noise out there that I think you have to be committed to staying the course.
Absolutely. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. You know, like you said, consistency is such a crucial component to it all, because, you know, so many people, I think, like, they just give up too soon, you know.
Yeah, they absolutely do.
And so, okay, so I want to talk about then, like, the markets, because, you know, obviously there's some markets in publishing that are, you know, much bigger than others. And I'm curious about the, you know, the publicity side of it. Like, are there some books or genres or markets that are really, really tough to pitch versus others that might be really, really easy? What does that landscape look like? Can you walk us through some of the different markets?
Sure. So at the beginning of my career, I worked, as I said, at Workman Publishing. So we had a lot of books that would fall into personal development, health, cookbooks, very practical application books. Workman was like really smart packaging. And Workman had this, Peter Workman, who is no longer with us, I'm sorry to say, but his philosophy was always a book never gets old. So if it's a cookbook and the book did great, and then 2 years after it came out, this particular cookbook talked about veganism and suddenly veganism is hot, he would send the author back out on tour. So I think that for books that are self-help and cooking and health, there's definitely always a hungry market for that kind of thing. Fiction is very review reliant. That requires, book review coverage by and large, and Amazon reviews and Goodreads and any place that will critically review books. I happen to work in the nonfiction space. So I work primarily, 75% of our titles are business, and the other 25% are current affairs, politics, memoir, biography, health, a little bit of a mishmash. I don't really think that there's a genre that is impossible to pitch or harder than others. I think most publicists do tend to specialize. So if I were an author, I would certainly look for a firm that had done books within your genre. I think what's difficult for all genres is that picking the time and the opportunity of what to pitch when. So book coverage, by and large, book coverage can be an event in someone's platform where it's a good opportunity to say, hey, I'm a thought leader in my own space and I've now published a new book. That can get you a first hit. But I think the challenge is sort of staying relevant. In other words, going back to the book, bringing the book forward again when the news cycle kind of works in your favor. David Meerman Scott wrote a book and he talks a lot about newsjacking. Newsjacking is basically using what's going on in the environment to make another point. So I think from an author standpoint, what I would be watching for is like opportunities where whatever it is that you're a specialist in are suddenly getting a little bit more attention. That's kind of a hot spot that you can move toward and say, oh, wow, this is getting a lot of attention because of this event. So now might be a good time for me to start contributing a lot of content to increase the likelihood that the media is going to find me. Everybody's sort of big goal is to turn this from being pro-at where you're pushing to get it to the point where people are coming to you. So that's true across all boards. If an author comes out with the first novel, that first one is going to be an uphill climb for reviews. You're an unknown. You're not a commodity. Everyone's going to have to make a really, concerted effort to get them. But by the time you get to the second or third book, hopefully you have enough reviewers in your camp who are going to say, oh, I want to see the next thing that Tom writes. I want to see what that next novel says. So all of it's just a long haul game. And I think that there isn't really one genre that has a huge advantage.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, definitely. So I'm thinking of the next question. So I want to talk about, return on investment then, because I think a lot of authors, they really want to know, is it going to be worth it? Right? Like, especially for something like this, like you said, and I totally agree that it's a long-term thing. You have to be in it for the long term to really be successful. So can you tell us about some of the costs of getting publicity nowadays? What can people expect to pay, and when can they expect return, if ever?
So I think this is a really good question. So return on investment is always really difficult for those of us in public relations because, as I mentioned, there's no one silver bullet hit. So you're always going to have the client where collectively there were enough media hits during the course of the campaign that they can definitely see the impact. The question is, where are they going to see the impact? So are they going to see the impact today, or are they going to see the impact when they have book 2 out? Rule of thumb on payments is you can pay anywhere from $1,000 to $100,000 for a publicity campaign, depending on what it is, what you want, how big your book is, what kind of a concentrated effort. I think you as an author need to sit back and say to yourself, okay, I can invest X number of dollars because over the course of this campaign, I will be able to recoup that cost in this way. Most authors cannot recoup the cost of PR on book sales alone. Most authors need to recoup it in terms of how much more valuable they become to a publisher. So if they do a first book and they are able to get a lot of reviews and a lot of coverage, hopefully the PR money that they invested will come back to them in the next advance. For authors in the nonfiction and specifically the business space, 95% of them will not recoup the amount of the PR campaign on the book themselves. Where they recoup it is in consulting contracts, in speaking gigs, in their ability to generate income on some other service that they offer that they were able to sell because they were more prominently in the public eye. And, I really tell people to invest accordingly. In other words, if you're going to self-publish a book and you don't have national distribution or you only have online distribution, you don't want to spend $100,000 on a campaign because the chances are you're not going to be able to recoup a piece of that investment unless you sell something that, you know, will ignite from that campaign, and you'll be able to get the money back. So it all, again, I keep saying customizing, but really all of this in our world today is extremely customized. And what I always do with authors, the first conversation is about expectations. What are you hoping to get? You know, what is your goal in publishing this book from a PR standpoint? Are you hoping to get coverage in a wish list of 5 publications that you can tell me about? Are you hoping that you're going to get 10 invitations to come and give talks and signings at bookstores or before groups? Are you looking to launch a career as a public speaker? Are you a coach or a consultant and you're looking for more new clients? Our first conversation is all about that, and then we try to dig backward from there. So if somebody wants to be a coach to CEOs, then we know we need to hit publications that CEOs read and have the potential to discover this person. So that's how we look at it. Is who's your intended audience? What's your goal in getting, you know, your investment back? And then our job is to figure out what media is most likely to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. So, okay, so great. So we've talked about the investment financially. Then what about the investment of time that the author needs to put into the whole process? What does that look like?
You know, there's a lot of publicity. Used to be a game where you went out and you did a book tour and your publisher set up 25 bookstore events, and you got on a plane and you went from place to place. And time and again, authors would come back for those and say, wow, how did that make sense? It was great, and I did local media, but I only sold 100 books at each thing. That couldn't possibly pay for it, right? So now the way publicity works, by and large, is virtually the way we're doing this right now. So the time can be really managed around whatever time you have. Very few authors have a clear plate to just, hey, I'm off my job for 3 months and I can be at your beck and call. Instead, we really try to work around what somebody's schedule is. So if I've got a business author and in the course of the 3 months as their book comes out, they're going to hit 2 cities a month, and they can give me 5 bylined articles, and we can fit in interviews around whatever they're doing for their business. That's what we work with. So the first thing I would do would go into each city that they're going to be in anyway, see if I could set up a book signing or a talk or an event in those cities while they're there anyway. Then I would go to the media in each city and talk to them about the local event that the person was doing to get the local media in place. And then I'd work with the author to give me the rest of the deliverables. The biggest deliverable today is bylined material. So it used to be we would go to a publication, they'd say, I'd love to feature Tom's book. I'm going to do a review. It'll be in the June issue on page 8, and we'll let you know when the review is done and shoot you a copy. Now what's likely to happen is that publication will say, you know, we'd love to feature it, but we don't have a book review column anymore, and we don't have the author Q&A, but you know what, we've got a spot for 750 words if he wants to write something for us. So what we do then is take all those requests, figure out which ones are the best use of the author's time in terms of the audience they're trying to reach, and help them write and edit those pieces. So the author's time can be really fluctuated, but it can also fit around everything else that's going on in their lives. Creating content, always worth your time. I can almost always place something that someone's written, though we do tend to go the opposite. In other words, we want to get an assignment as opposed to asking you to create a bunch of stuff that may or may not be right in style and tone. 2, I want to work around your schedule. I had one author who spent every other month in Singapore because his wife was the U.S. ambassador to Singapore. His book publicity, no one, I don't think, even realized how far away he was. So when he was in the U.S., we took advantage of it. When he was in Singapore, he participated just like you and I are doing right now. He went to public radio. He went to a radio lab, was able to do NPR from Singapore. An author's time can be managed really well, and most publicists can work really cleverly around whatever time the author has to devote to it.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you for clearing that up. That's awesome. So you mentioned, like writing those articles, writing reviews, getting those posted in the media. Is it possible to take just, blog articles, blog posts, articles that authors have already written on their website and basically take those and put those in the traditional media, or does that not often work?
Sometimes it works. It depends on what their style and tone is, and it depends on the publication we're working for. So what we like to do is keep the author's time very well spent. In other words, if I know that I can place 10 bylines, I'm going to look at the publications that are going to give you the most bang for your buck. Then I'm going to look at your content pile and see if there's anything that's looks like it would be a good fit for that publication. If I can do that, then what we do is take that piece and edit for style and tone. Most of the big major outlets, whether they be national magazines or newspapers or large blogs, want original. They don't want it run somewhere else first. So it's a little hard to reverse engineer, but anything you do create, you can run in that publication. Then you can work the channel the other way and then post it on your own blog afterward. So, you know, repurposing is a little tough. The one place that you can really cleanly repurpose is to LinkedIn. When LinkedIn opened up their publishing feature, that was momentous, I think, for most authors, because they can write a blog on their own blog page and they can take that same post and post it over on LinkedIn and basically get double duty for their content. I also tell people who've written books, save everything that's on the cutting room floor. So there may be material that was edited out for length or style or tone. Start developing a content bank. We can figure out how to cut it and paste it and edit it and shape it for publication at a later date. But that's the one thing I feel like authors can proactively do at any time.
That's such a great point. You know, I've been saying that for years, that like you should never delete anything, you know, because
You're right.
you know, with digital files today, there's no cost to store it. And you never know when that, you know, article or chapter you took out, or, you know, even that one paragraph might be really, really valuable later on down the road.
You know, I think that's such a good point. I mean, we always say to people, archive, archive, archive. And what we're saying is don't throw it away. We worked on a book a couple of years ago now, though you see it in just about every airport, called The One Thing by Gary Keller.
It's a great book,
yeah. Great book about time block. I mean, we all became devotees of this thing. But the one thing he said, I will never forget, in the one of our early meetings, he said, do you know that like 70% of the emails that you get that ask you for something, whatever they're asking you for, 75% of it already exists somewhere else in your computer. You don't have to recreate it every single time. You probably already did it. You know, that list that they're asking for, or the guideline. He said, you know what, if you just keep it all there and keep it organized in a way you can access it, you're going to get so much faster. And I'm shocked at how true that is. I really am shocked. And like you said, sometimes even now I can remember, you know, we're doing the same thing for our books, writing a lot of bylines. Rusty Shelton, my co-author, and we both have the archives. So, you know, definitely when we get a request, we're back in the archive looking to see, is there anything, you know, what part of this might fit with what they want here. Oh, it's a branding publication, so let's go back to a section on that. And oh, here's 1,000 words we didn't even make it in the book. That is such a head start. I mean, anyone who writes knows that. The page is no longer blank. Cut, paste, and start to edit. It's so much easier than starting from ground zero.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, you know, before you go, Barbara, about your book and why you wrote it.
Yeah, so I met Rusty back in 2010, and I live in Austin, Texas, which is a little unusual for someone who works in book publicity, since publishing is based in New York. And he was one of the few other people who I had sort of known was out and about in town. He worked for another PR agency at that time, and about 6 months after I met him, he went out on his own. And Rusty was building a shop to do websites and to do social media for authors, while I was working at that time pretty much at the other end of the spectrum on traditional media. So we decided to collaborate whenever we could on whatever projects where we had authors who were eager for everything. We were able to bring somebody in and offer them everything from a website to the content creation to social media training to traditional media and everything out the door. But as we started doing this over the last 5 years, is we really began to see that the concept of social media or digital media versus traditional was a really limited way of looking at the world. That instead it was much more like this circle that I talked about. And that certainly our skills at pitching traditional media translate perfectly well to anyone who's a what we call micromedia outlet, which is, you know, a blog, a podcast, a smaller, less traditional outlet. So we started doing more of that work at the same time we were learning social media. We just began to see the landscape differently. So we really decided to write the book after we'd given a presentation, and there was a lot of interest that said, hey, that's a whole new way of looking at it. I think it's an encouraging way. We really feel like we're kind of at the forefront of, this is like the gold rush, you know, This is new places and opportunities for authors, most particularly. As I said, they don't have to wait for gatekeepers. They could use a little instruction. They could use a little training because they are lay journalists, but they can really go across this circle. And you know what? At the end of the day, going around that circle really helps people create their own audience. So that was why we decided to write the book. We just decided that that old concept of sort of, and a lot of people pitch traditional and digital against one another. Oh, well, so-and-so says traditional is more important. Well, so-and-so says social is more important. And what Rusty and I always found was that both of them were important. And more importantly, they helped each other. You know, I could get a hit in HBR, Harvard Business Review, and then he would turn around and help that author broadcast it out on social media in a way that was palatable, that wasn't just, you know, here's another hit about my book. Here's another hit about my book. So we really wrote it to sort of answer that question and kind of unite our profession a little bit.
Awesome. That's great. Well, where can people find out more about you, Barbara, and the work that you're doing?
Sure. We developed a landing page for the book, so they can go to www.masteringthenewmedialandscape.com. From that page, you can also visit, you can click on me and plop over to my blog and my website for my company, which is cavehenricks.com, or you can hit on my co-author, Rusty Shelton, and you can visit his page. Both of us blog, both of us have places where you can leave your name, send us an email, get in touch. We're always happy to talk to authors.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing all your wisdom with us today, Barbara. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. This was a lot of fun, and we didn't even have to talk basketball.
Yeah, maybe next time.
All right.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.